Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Good morning and welcome to Demystifying Investment by Development Bank. My name's Cole and I'm here with two other investor colleagues, Alex and Dave, who you can see on screen and you'll hear from them shortly. So Development Bank is a pretty wide entity, but the three of us work in the tech ventures team, which completes between 30 and 40 equity deals a year, making us by most counts the third most active tech VC in the whole of the UK. In the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to run through 10 top tips for speeding up your funding round. Now, it's worth saying that many of the points we run through today will be best practice for startups to consider whether they're looking at raising early seed rounds backed by angels, or indeed a more substantial round backed by VCs. However, not all angels will be looking at deals in quite as much detail as VC or institutional investors will. It can often be quite a shock to the system then when startups who've secured angel funding previously with relatively light touch diligence and legals engage with VCs like DevBank and become party to an in-depth investment process. VCs have a lot of process to get through if the investor working on your deal is to secure sanction to complete it from your fund manager or an investment committee. As startup founders, you can absolutely help to speed up and streamline this process if you adequately prepare for the investment process. So on the next slide, we'll see 10 major issues that are frequent barriers to success, and we're going to show you afterwards how to overcome them. So the 10 points are an unclear value proposition, an unclear exit plan, not prepared appropriately for the due diligence that needs to take place in the investment process, a lack of a defensive moat, a lack of clarity and realism in the sales pipeline, not enough strength or range of team skills and experience, not enough understanding of the critical process requirements, an unclear business plan or poor financial forecasts, a lack of detail on the size of the commercial opportunity, and perhaps most importantly, a breakdown of the relationship between the entrepreneur and the investor. So we're going to take you through our 10 top tips, and my colleague Alex is going to take you through the first point on the next slide.
Thanks very much, Cole. Very good introduction, and I think it really set the scene. And I'd just like to echo one of your points you made there. You know, what we're trying to do is get cash into your business so that you can carry on and run it and succeed. So that's what the purpose of this session, to really help get that alignment and have that, very successful marriage, as we call it. So starting at the beginning, do you understand what problem you're trying to solve? Now, this is often referred to as a strong customer pain, and I like to do it on a rating scale. Like, you might find a problem and say, why has no one solved that? And it might be because on a scale of 1 to 10, it's only a 1 or 2 out of 10 in terms of how bad is that pain. And it's the ones where it's 9 or 10, where it's like, oh, this is something worth solving and something that your customer's worth paying for. Now, put another way, that's your value proposition. And so, you think about the brands that have done really well. They have a really good intersection of those three circles that make a strong value proposition. So is it 10 times better? Is it 3 times faster? Look at the new Tesla coming out 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. That's better than anything else on the market besides maybe a Veyron, I don't even know. And you look at Spotify, you look at Uber, you look at all of these great companies. It all comes down to that value proposition. You can get a lot of things wrong, but as long as that value proposition is strong, you will probably succeed. And and that's not always obvious. And sometimes, we see it right at the early stage where you don't have a lot of financial information to actually base your investment thesis on. But getting the value proposition right means that, investors will probably take the bet and go on the journey with you. And it's so crucial, because even if you get up to $1 million or $2 million per year annual recurring revenue, you don't have it quite nailed, you'll probably struggle to scale at that point and get the growth that you need to attract future follow-on raises. So really get that value proposition absolutely crystal clear. It is the core of your business. besides the team, of course. Now, on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about exits. Now, exit, well, how does that fit in with the startup journey? Because, investors expect you to be a passionate founder and passionate about what you do. But in the same breath, they're saying, well, when are you going to sell your business? And that's an interesting dichotomy. And I think the most important thing to say is, if the day you accept venture capital is the day that you agree to sell your business. And that's not necessarily right for everyone. So if you have a family business and you want to run it for the next 20 years and pass it down to your children, and you want to just pay out a constant dividend every year, venture capital is probably not right for you. But, VC has a lot of upsides. And if you do decide to go on the journey, you might look at a very big exit. SaaS multiples are an all-time high. So, you can create a tremendous amount of value. And that's why a lot of people are attracted to this tech VC-backed entrepreneurial journey. What are the different options? You could go public and, do the infamous IPO. More common these days. You've seen the rise of this special purpose vehicle, the SPAC. Going public is probably not going to be the most common, or it isn't the most common route, and it's probably not right for most businesses. You're more than likely going to center around that second point, that sell to an acquirer. And now that could be anyone. It could be one of your suppliers, it could be one of your customers, or it could most likely be one of your competitors. And that's come back to that value proposition. If you've got a very strong value proposition and you have a new entrant, a competitor that comes into the market and they have loads of funding, they're always going to be very worried about you. And often, instead of having a marketing battle, trying to fight you out on, on Google and Facebook, trying to win customers' attention, they might just decide, hang on, it's just easier to buy you. And that's your big liquidity event. Hey, exit, pop the champagne, investors are happy, you're happy, and the whole thing has worked. Another interesting journey or route is selling your company to your employees, often termed a management buyout. And that's quite common. I've done a few of those. But basically, if you build a strong company, if you empower your employees, if you create that succession planning, that the company is not solely dependent on you, it will help you exit. Great. So next slide. What I want to talk about is due diligence. Now, due diligence can be quite a scary topic for some. However, I want to try and change perceptions today. I want you to look at due diligence that just in the same way that, gentleman on the left there has a magnifying glass. Someone is looking at your business, and yes, part of it is looking to, establish whether they're making a good investment. But once they've made that judgment call and they said, this is a good investment, they're probably going to keep on digging. And why? The reason being is that once their cash is invested in the business, they're going to want to help the business. They're going to want to see it grow. And how do they do that? By spotting weaknesses. And investors are very good at doing that because they look at so many businesses. Any given investor will probably look at anything between 100 and 1,000 business plans a year. They'll have a portfolio of anywhere between 2 and 100 portfolio companies. So they'll see similar trends and patterns, and they can apply these things to your business. So due diligence is, it's quite flattering actually. Someone has taken the time to really look at your business and say, wow, you're doing these things really well, and here I spot some areas for value creation. So tell you what, once I put my money in, here's a 100-day plan or just a normal business plan on the things where I think we can create value. And you can do that stage by stage and go on that journey. And what that's going to do is not only, that's good for the investor, of course, because they're not going to lose their money and they're going to maximize their exit value, but they're also going to maximize your exit value. So, what should you be doing? I guess it's making sure that everything is as perfect as possible and you've done the best you can. Everything is well documented, thought through, you've got proper analysis, evidence-based decisions, so that when investors look, they're delighted and all they're doing is sprinkling on that gold dust, which makes your business go even faster. I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague David, who's going to take you through the next section. Over to you, Dave.
It's actually me next, Al.
It's fine. My apologies.
Thanks, Alex. So our next point is, what exactly is your defensive moat? Now, what this really means is, how are you going to stop competitors directly competing with you and taking the share of the market that you need to drive a healthy exit and return? You can create a defensive position in a number of ways, with the most obvious one being incredible intellectual property that others would find hard to replicate. Now, this is more typical in hardcore engineering companies or medtech firms with groundbreaking R&D, certainly harder to do in software businesses such as SaaS products. If you are a software company, we'll be worried as investors about putting money into you, then a rival simply throwing some time and resource and using developers to create a similar solution in a matter of weeks or even days. So if the tech isn't defensive, do you have incredible commercial partnerships in place that others would find hard to replicate? Or even data pools on your market or customers that put you out ahead of the competition and that others would find hard to catch up on? So consider how you create a defensible position and then how you best communicate that to your investors. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about the sales pipeline. What does your sales pipeline actually look like? So ideally, investors want to see proof of good product market fit, and that means paying customers. So show us a traction that you have made there to date. If you don't have that, show us any other traction that you do have, which could readily turn into commercial sales. This could be free trials, which have gone really well and could be flipped into paying customers. What about the rest of your sales pipeline? What does it look like, and is it realistic? So startup founders need to strike that really careful balance between showing investors there is ample opportunity in their sales pipeline, but also make sure we're comfortable that you're being realistic about what you can actually secure. It would be really worrying if we saw a sales pipeline that didn't tally with a deliverable marketing and sales plan for securing clients. If you've made no sales to date, but have a large corporation in your sales pipeline, for example, with no way of getting to them, that's going to ring alarm bells to us. So don't include target sales which have no way of actually achieving. It won't go down well. So on the next slide, which is actually my favorite point to look at in an investment opportunity, it's about the team, and it really is all about the team. Startups often don't realize just how closely investors look at and how important the founding team is. Most investors would rather back a brilliant founding team with mediocre tech rather than the other way around. In early stage and even most scale-up funding rounds, investment is being made into the team more than the tech they are deploying. Some key points to consider here then. Make sure you are not a sole founder. You absolutely cannot do it all alone. Create a founding team with complementary skills. There's no point in having 3 technical co-founders who don't know how to do operations, marketing, or even worse, sales. Or for that matter, 3 marketeers with no ability to actually build the damn product. We always prefer to see a technical co-founder with shares in the business and therefore a strong alignment in driving value going forward. It's really unsustainable to outsource all of your tech build, and it's not attractive to most investors. It's not just about skills though. Proven experience is just as important too, as is understanding how you can leverage your network as well. Okay, so that's me done. Next, I'll hand over to my colleague Dave, who will take you through the 4 remaining tips.
Thanks, Colin. And thank you, Alex, as well. It's been very informative, the stuff that you've been able to share with us so far. So, I mean, fortunately, I've been given the incredibly interesting sections to talk about, which include process and timelines. And I think, one of the things that I think as a company looking to raise money, what you need to be aware of is the fact that, we can't cut checks as quick as an angel will be able to. And the reason for that, and it kind of makes sense really, if you're a high net worth and you've got a bank account with loads of money in, you can do whatever you want with it. But from our perspective, we are investing other people's money. So what that means is we do have a due process to go through where we have to ensure that, very much the point I think that Alex made about due diligence, that the company is what we believe it is that we're investing in. So with that in mind, I'll just quickly run you through, an example of what a process might look like in those timelines. And, in particular, obviously, the development bank's process and timelines. And very much what we explain to people from our very first meeting will be that on average, we think it takes about 3 months to go from start to end. That is on average, and it can be significantly longer. It can also be shorter. But what I'll do is I'll highlight some of the areas where there may be issues with that. That deals tend to get hung up on certain points. So we'll go on to talk about that. And this process is very similar for the majority of institutional investors. And that means there is an initial sanction paper after the first meeting. This is based on essentially our summary of the company, of the information that you will have provided. And that would allow for us to essentially be able to present to our investment committee the outline of the opportunity. At that stage, we have a discussion with them. We present a paper and it will essentially say, these are the main reasons why we would support this business, X, Y, and Z. And what will happen at the investment committee is they will say to us, okay, that sounds great. What we need to do is, you've identified a number of risks with this. You're going to have to go on and do some additional due diligence. But at that stage, after that initial sanction, we will be able to issue the outline terms to your business. That is, I think, a key milestone for a lot of companies, because you kind of require the term sheet to be able to raise funds from other people. Also, I guess it might be competitive as well. So you'll want to see what the potential deal might look like at the very end, but by the time we get to the legal documentation. And this is a document that will outline, I guess, our key requirements. Things like pre-money valuation, the amount of shares we're going to be buying, and some of the other points that would be required, from that kind of perspective. So after the term sheet is issued to you, we'll then move into a phase that will be kind of like a deep due diligence phase, really. And those key areas that we'll be looking at very much focus on the kind of commercial due diligence. So this will be things like, if you've got customers, this is very much about looking at the contracts that you might already have in place. Or, you might be at, earlier stage in that, and that might mean looking at some letters of understanding or letters of interest from potential customers, or even talking to potential customers and understanding what it might be, the reasons that they might buy your product or service. Another stage within that due diligence is financial due diligence, which I think for a lot of people, you kind of think, this is kind of a bit boring, but we quite like the kind of financial stage because it helps to kind of illustrate the kind of consideration that has gone into the business plan and I guess the market research that you as a founding team will have had to have undertaken, and how your thought process has kind of flown through into a kind of financial model. Typically what we'll do with that is a number of sensitivities that will say, well, you're expecting, and this normally happens, normally by year 3, you'll be expecting £50 million in revenue, and it's going to require, £500,000 worth of investment in order to get to that stage. But, there's going to be costs involved. But in practice, what we'll do when we sensitize it is we'll look at what is your straight burn. So how long does the cash that we put into your business, how long would that last if your costs are as you say they would be over that model? And, we're particularly interested in making sure that the company has a minimum of kind of 12 to 18 months worth of runway. So what that might mean is we would say, if in that example of a 50 million in revenue by year 3, what we'd probably do is sensitize it very heavily to see whether the numbers still stack up. And, what could happen, and this does happen actually when we have our initial conversations or early stage conversations with companies, is they might not actually be raising enough money in order to kind of cover off that period. And that's very much about what this financial due diligence piece is, making sure that the company has enough money to be able to get it to the next value inflection point. That would be, I know Colin and Alex, haven't necessarily explained the kind of stages at which we invest, but we will typically invest at kind of a seed stage business, which can be pre-revenue. And we've got venture stage deals that we would also invest in, where they would typically be generating revenues of a certain amount, and will probably have likely, significant costs to go with it as well. So one of the other areas that we'd look at would be IP. As a technology fund, and I think to the point that Colin made about moats, IP for us is a very significant matter. And that will mean things like, do you own the right to use the technology that you're building? And it's funny because sometimes we'll do the checks and it will turn out that that is not the case. You don't have the right to use it, or actually the right belongs to somebody else and you're infringing their IP. That, from an investor's perspective, would be it would be a very bad situation to find ourselves in, really. So that's why we're trying to cover that off. We also have a legal due diligence phase where we would ask, in our case, we tend to have, it's a legal questionnaire, and it covers off a majority of legal points that you would expect that we would have an interest in knowing. Are you the only owner of the business? Who are the owners of the business? What are the main contracts that you've got in place? And what that will do is that kind of leads to a data room, which I'll talk about on the next slide when I get there. So I won't jump too much into that at this point. Management due diligence is another, I think, as Colin said, the management teams for us are very important. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that what your backgrounds are what you say they are. And that kind of makes sense, really, because we will normally have people present to us who say, we are experts in our field because of X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, it's kind of on us just to make sure that we check that they are in fact experts in what they say they are, that they've got the technical skills to be able to develop what they're saying they're going to. And that also kind of blends nicely in with the technical due diligence, which is, and I tend to focus on software businesses, but as a fund, we're technology agnostic, so it can fall across a number of different sectors. That could be hardware or not. And when we do this kind of technology due diligence, what we're trying to understand is whether the kind of roadmap of building the product makes sense. So it could be that you're trying to build a brand new electric car, for example, and you think you're going to be able to build it in 6 months. But when we look at that technical roadmap, is it feasible to really build an electric car in 6 months? I'm sure there will be a lot of people who said it will be, but typically, this stuff needs to be sense checked, and that then informs the kind of financial model, really, because if we know it's actually going to take a year in order to do that, we need to make sure that the company's got enough money to be able to cover that period. So after all of that due diligence, we then write up a second investment paper, which is the main investment paper. And this is where we then report back to our investment committee and say, look, we've had this opportunity. We think it's great. We've done the due diligence on it, and it all confirms that it's great. Can we go ahead and make the investment? At that point, our investment committee will say, yeah, please do. Let's go ahead and do the deal. And then what we'll do then is we'll move into the legal documentation stage, which, if it's your first experience of doing a legal stage, is going to be a bit of a baptism of fire. But with good legal counsel, you get through it. You'll get through it. So you've not got to worry about going through those. And I will say, this tends to be one of the stages where deals kind of get hung up. This, and for us, we require co-investors as well. So waiting for co-investors to come in alongside us can take a bit of time. And then the other stage then is the legal stage, where there can sometimes be prolonged to-in and fro-in over kind of immaterial, I guess people would argue differently. They could be material matters to different people, but in the grand scheme of things, they tend to be little nitpick kind of things where this kind of slows things down. And I will say, as an institution, we have a very, use the term beige kind of legal documentation requirement, and it's follows the BVCA standards, so it's pretty normal. So finding solicitors who are used to dealing with these kind of contracts will save a lot of time for you, and actually will save a lot in fees as well, because when they're used to dealing with these kind of contracts, they get to the point very quickly. And actually, one of the things that I'll be talking about on one of the later slides is about the relationships that we have with each other. And actually, a lot of the points that go into the legal documentations are commercial points rather than legal regulatory points. So a lot of these things can actually be covered off between you talking to me. And if we can cover those off, we can actually then explain to the solicitors what it is that we're looking for. And that can save a significant amount of time as well. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. We'll talk about getting your key documents in order, because this is, so I just kind of mentioned the due diligence process, which tends to require what is called a data room. And a data room is essentially, we tend to get them on shared drives these days, but they tend to be a folder that has got a huge amount of information within it that as a business owner, you would want to share with us so that we can get a fuller understanding of your business. But the other thing that we'd look for is a business plan, although it's not my favorite thing, receiving like a 100-page technical business plan as an introduction to a company. I'm a much bigger fan of a much shorter, succinct pitch deck, where you can give a very quick overview of what the company is, what the opportunity is, who the management team are, and how much you're looking to raise, and the kind of investment piece alongside it gives a much clearer understanding. So, I mean, what you've got to understand is a lot of institutions review an awful lot of opportunities. I know some who are getting, they get 1,000 a year each. So you can appreciate that there's probably not that much time for them to read through 1,100-page Word document business plans, especially if they're really turgid as well. Can be very, very kind of difficult. So you want to keep it succinct as certainly that kind of initial stage. One of the other documents, and I mentioned it earlier, was the kind of financial models. And for me, the financial models are important because they do illustrate that you have considered what your business is, that the technology and whether that's widgets or whether that's space rockets or whether that's a piece of software, but you've kind of considered what it is, how much it's going to cost in order to build, and how you're going to get it to market, and how much that's going to cost. And then the bit that's left is going to be like the profit, or it might be no profit for the first year or 2 years. And that's actually quite normal for us to see that in a financial plan, but it's got to be in the plan, because the last thing we'd want is to invest in a company that says it's going to be profitable from day one, and actually it's loss-making for the next 3 years. It's going to be a bit of a nightmare. So they're the key documents that we look for. We also have, as part of our kind of drawdown process, and as an institution, we've got kind of KYC, know your customer, and anti-money laundering requirements, where there are then kind of some additional kind of process that needs to be undertaken, which would be kind of verification of IDs and company bank statements, and we undertake searches as well of individuals. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I've just seen a question come up asking about the importance of a data room. So with the data room for us, I guess is wider context. Within the legal documentation, you're going to be asked to say the information that you've provided to us is true and accurate. And if that's not true, if that's not the case, there would obviously be ramifications for that. And as part of that legal process, you will be asked to say to us, have you disclosed information to us that you're comfortable, that you know to be true? And the data room will have all that information in. And it was normal that that data room will then be referenced in your disclosure letter. So that's why that document is important, because we have to actually go through and kind of review every piece of information within it, because it is going to be officially disclosed to us. Okay. Do you know your TAM and SOM from your elbow? This is always one that kind of makes me laugh a little bit, really, because it is one that can be done well, and it's one that can be done really, really poorly. We typically see, so your TAM, for example, is your total addressable market. And typically what people will do is they'll go and they'll have a quick look on the internet, and they'll say, if I think of an example off the top of my head, you're going to build a car. And they'll go into their TAM, they'll look at the value of transport in the entire world. And it will be like $1 trillion. They'll be like, this is $1 trillion industry, this is why I'm going to be a part of it. But I say, you're actually probably starting at the wrong spot for your TAM there. It probably needs to be total car sales in the world, rather than all automotive, cruise liners, anything to do with transport whatsoever. So that's one that just needs to be just made sure it's correct. And as an institution, typically we're looking for TAMs that will be in excess of, to put it about $1 billion. I mean, Alex, Colin, have you got any thoughts on that? So yeah, it's typically about $1 billion. The reason for that is because the service addressable market, which is going to be your, I guess we'll call it the more regional version. So if I take my example of selling cars for it, again, what you have is how many cars are sold in the entire world, which is your TAM, and your SAM is going to be how many cars are sold in the UK, because actually I'm only going to be selling cars in the UK. And that will be your SAM. And then your SOM, which is going to be your share of the market. Realistically, as a startup, your share is going to be zero. But what you're going to be thinking about is how much of that market do I need to take in order to, it's kind of two things going on there. How much of the market do I need to take in order to grow my company to a successful size? And if the answer of that is you need 90% of the SAM, as in I need to sell my car to 90% of people in the UK, then that is not going to be particularly achievable. Whereas if your business plan is based around the fact that you only need to get a 2 or 3% share of that market, now that starts to look a lot more reasonable to begin with. And of course, it's going to be a lot less than that to begin with anyway. But, it's kind of starting with the end in mind and trying to work out what that total opportunity is for us. So we'll do that, and we'll have a look and make sure that kind of ties in with the financial model. So what you're already seeing is how a lot of these things kind of come together and inform other decisions for us around the place. So that is your TAM, SAM, and your SOM. And I believe we've got another slide. Building your relationship. So this for me, when I reflect on the best deals that I've done, these always come down to relationships. And I always think that this is very much about, we're kind of going on a long journey together from the very first stage where we meet a company that pitches to us and we'd like to invest in, through to our investment, and then even beyond our investment. This goes forward a much, not quite indefinitely, but certainly up until that point where that exit happens. And there will be, like all relationships, there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs within it. And having a closer relationship does inform, it helps to have, I find anyway, those kind of difficult conversations where you need to be a bit of a frank truth sometimes, but also to be able to support and nurture. Because I think sometimes people will say, why have an institution on board? Well, actually, one of the things we can do is, if we've got a close relationship, you can lean on us to open other doors for you. And it's those companies that will say to me, look, Dave, do you think you can do this for me? Do you think you can do that? I go, yeah, well, I don't know if I can, but I'll certainly go and see if I can find an answer for you or look into it. And that helps, both sides of the relationship. And I think very much early on, one of the things I'm really keen on doing is having regular meetings. So, that investment process that we said takes 1 to 3, 3 months onwards earlier. Actually, what I'd like to do is I like to make sure I'm having regular contact with the companies during that process, so that we're constantly feeding back, understanding where we are in the process, and understanding any changes that might be going on. Because actually, during that period, if you're a startup, things actually change quite significantly over that kind of 6 month period. Sometimes if it takes 6 months, an awful lot can change for your business in that time. And for us to be able to have a kind of working relationship where we can be feeding that back to each other is incredibly important. And I think this also works both ways as well, because it gives us as an institution the opportunity to really understand you as a person or as a founding team, and what drives you, and speaking to your honesty and your experiences and your skills and your knowledge. But conversely, it works the same for us as well. It would work the same for you as well, where you have the ability to get to know us better and understand that we're a partner that you want to work with, as opposed to being worried that we're just like money hungry VCs. And you'll get to understand that actually there's a lot more to those relationships than that by a long way. So yeah, so that's everything I've got to say. I think back to Colin.
Back to Alex.
It's me. We're doing really good here. So no, all good. So on the next slide, we're just going to wrap it up. But before we get to these points, I just wanted to say, it was, for me at least, it was very therapeutic listening to first Cole and then David. And what really hit home for me is it just endorsed everything that I do. And I think that's a message to everyone in the audience, that you just see that consistency across all investors. It's, the rigor, the very straight-laced, what you see is what you get. And that's certainly what Development Bank of Wales is all about. And you could see the passion that all three of us have exhibited today. We really are, really want entrepreneurs to succeed. And we have that entrepreneurial spark as well. And we happen to sit on this side of the table initially at our first conversation, but then we're back around your side of the table, fighting your corner and helping you on those later rounds. And it really is a relationship, and it's our job. And what we want to do is come to work every day happy, work with nice colleagues, and that's what you become. And so it's a wonderful role that we have, and we just like to help you all succeed. And that comes on to this next slide. What you'll recognize some of these points from the agenda that Cole flashed up at the beginning. And what we've taken is those problem statements and the barriers to success and turned them into, this is how you be successful. And providing you have a very strong business, it's actually quite easy, because it's quite a simple process. So you've done the hard bit, you've taken the big leap of faith, you are an entrepreneur, you wired differently, you're perhaps not, you can do the corporate thing, but you've chosen to go on this really exciting journey. So just to go through the points, how do you be successful? And this is not only, it's both for your business and on the investment journey. And that again shows the alignment. So it's having that clear value proposition. And investors might come to you and say, well, what is the value proposition? And really drill down into it. But once you find out what it is and you document it and you write down the financial analysis that your customers might do, you'll say, you're currently paying X, how about you take my solution and pay a third of that? And so it's a powerful focus mechanism. Coming on to the exit plan, understanding who you're going to exit to. Do your research. How does industry work? What multiples might you achieve? and who might be the potential people that you're going to exit to. And just knowing that just helps you, understand where you're going. Entrepreneurship is often described as crossing a river in the fog, and it's just one stone at a time. And that is quite great, but at least if you know where you're heading to, it's going to give you the courage to go on that winding journey. Be prepared for due diligence. I think Dave answered that question exceptionally well. You'll see it's, there's all the different components, but it all just comes together, and it's just trying to validate what we believe and what you've told us. Clarify your defensive moat. Now, that's not a one-off thing, especially in software businesses, which is a lot of our focus here in the room today. Things change, it's very dynamic, so you have to constantly stress test that and making sure you're locking in value and that keeping the competitors out. Clear and realistic sales pipeline, that's not for your investors, that's for you. You don't want to set yourself up for failure and say, we've got 2 million in the sales pipeline and it's not going to convert for the next 4 years. That doesn't help you, because you're probably going to scale up your costs and then inadvertently run out of cash. Make sure you've got a high degree of certainty that they're going to close, and that's why they're in the sales pipeline. And it just helps you feed into your financial model and keeps you on the straight and narrow. Strong spread of team skills and experience. Cole spoke exceptionally well to that one, just saying, this is, you can't afford to outsource everything. They're not going to be aligned with your business. And never mind that you probably won't have enough money. So often when people say, I need to raise money to bring in a CTO, I say, why? The cheaper way of doing that is parting with some equity, and it's cost neutral. So always think in that lens and try to get a complete skill set. There will be small gaps, and that's okay, as long as you know where they are.
I'd just like to add there that actually sometimes having more people on the team, it can be incredibly lonely, I think, being a founder.
Absolutely.
So having some additional people that are in it the same way that you are, it can be, it makes the whole process easier in the long run as well, as long as you can find the right partners to be involved with.
Absolutely. And there's an interesting phenomenon that the word that CEOs most commonly use to describe their job is lonely. And in a startup where you're taking on the big boys or girls, you don't want to do that alone. You want to have people around you, just someone to bounce ideas off and just to share that problem. And you don't want it to be your spouse, and you don't want it to be your barista. So just get a co-founder. It's the best way to do it. Then, of course, number 7, understand the critical process requirements, very comprehensively done by David there. And I think the lesson here is just, other people have done it before you. So it might look a bit scary, but just speak to an entrepreneur, work with your professional advisors, speak to your investor. They want to do the deal just as much as you. So just work together on that. Number 8, clear business plan and financial forecasts. Very comprehensive by Dave there again. Just make it, and I think the main point here is make those documents work for you. Don't produce them for investors, and then once you've got the investment, put them in the drawer and run your company a different way. Make it a working document. Say, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. This is my financial forecast for next month. And then fill it in and use those documents. That's the purpose of them. They aren't just fundraising documents for the sake of it. And just going through this process will, as I say, hone your value proposition, hone how you run your business, and create value just by doing it. So people see investment as a big distraction, and it is to a degree, but as I say, there's a number of benefits that come from it if done correctly. Knowing your market size, I think, everyone talks about being a unicorn, and Dave's calculations were very insightful there, where you could say, I need to have at least, say, 100 million of revenue on a 10x multiple, and then I can be a unicorn. And it just comes down to pounds and pence and who you can actually service. And then the relationship, as David said, this is absolutely key. People want to get along. Just nurture that relationship. It's what it's all about. It's the essence of why you do entrepreneurship, why everyone comes to work. You want to enjoy it, have a bit of fun. So, That's really key. Now, I'll go on to the next slide, and then I'd just like to invite Colin and David back in just to talk about a few other points. And here you've seen the three of us present today. We're a team of 14 in the technology venture investments team. We've got 11 people on the front line doing deals, and a lot of back end support that make the whole system work. And I think what you will see is, if you have a quick look at the bios, we've got a range of experience, sector depth and breadth. We've got PhDs in neuroscience. We have people who are good at transactors. We've got ex-entrepreneurs. We've got really a unique combination of skills. We've got people that understand your businesses. And if I could just finish on this point before I bring in Colin and David, I think the key of the TVI team within DBW is that we are business experts first and then investors, and not the other way around. So we really are here to help you on your journey. Thanks very much. Cole, do you want to share some thoughts and perhaps take a stab at the questions?
Yeah, thanks, Al. I'm just wondering, I was about to say, should we remove the slide? Two of each of us is probably no good thing up on the screen. So there's a couple of other questions that have come in. One about the sales pipeline and asking about whether we should do a weighted sales pipeline with potential deals and weighted probability, or only provide a pipeline with the sales completed. So the pipeline actually really needs to include the sales that you're hoping to make. But to come back to that point, please make sure they're realistic. We want to be able to see how you're actually going to land those sales. So don't include companies, like Apple or Google as sales opportunities you're going to land in 3 months if you've made no sales to date and have no way of actually getting out to them. Show us how you're going to do that. What we most like to see is a kind of a cookie cutter approach. So show us that you've actually made sales to one particular area of the market, you know how to do it, and you're going to replicate that again to sell to even more. There's a few more questions here. Please, could you talk about how you would normally value a company at the investment stage? What metrics do you consider most important? Al, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. And Dave, feel free to step in. I think, it can be quite an emotive issue. And I'd just like to just start off with the main, I read a lot of blogs, and one in particular that's worth having a look at is by Paul Graham, saying valuation is not the thing you're actually trying to optimize about your funding round. It's purely a mechanism of exchange to get the money into your business so that you can grow it, while ensuring that investors have an attractive equity stake and you're not diluted too much. And the way we do this is just with the valuation, of course. So, it's the guidance is typically that you should part with or sell, to use the correct terminology, between 20 and say 35% of equity per funding round. And the whole theory is that would you rather have a whole mouse or a small piece of an elephant? So it shouldn't really matter what that value is, because ultimately your shareholder value is going to grow. Now, maybe Dave, you want to jump into certain metrics?
I think really, as far as valuation is concerned, I think it's one of those things that people put a lot of emphasis on. And actually, when you understand how the market works, you realize that it doesn't really make all that much sense. So I think a lot of people kind of think of their pre-revenue, pre-technology, essentially just a bit of paper idea business. Intuitively, they value it at about £10 million, which is always, I wouldn't say laughed at. Seems to be you've got to start somewhere, right? With your kind of valuation. But that's going to be very different compared to a company that is already trading and is already generating revenues that might actually be able to help to justify what a valuation might be. But certainly at that kind of early stage, we would normally be looking for a kind of balance. It's a balanced criteria that's based on the management team, what the opportunity is, the technology, what stage the technology is. I mean, if it is literally just an idea on a bit of paper with no customer validation, it's going to be very hard to kind of infer a higher valuation than it would be if you've been able to say, I've got a number of customers lined up, they're prepared to pay me £1 million a year for it. When you get to that stage, then obviously the valuation increases. But, to my point that, there's a lot of emphasis put on valuation, but there's also a number of ways that valuations can also be artificially increased as well. So it's all fine and well me saying, yeah, I'll invest in your brand new company that isn't doing anything at £50 million valuation. But I'm going to put 250k in, but I'm going to take a 10x liquidation preference on it, or something like that. I mean, it's kind of unreasonable, but you don't always know when you're looking at the kind of internet and you're kind of reading about these kind of raises that are happening in certain places, and you're looking at it, you're like, how have they raised, at 100 million pre-money valuation? You don't know the intricacies of what's happening behind the scenes. That's just the top line price. And there's loads of ways that can be manipulated as well. So, but it really does change based on business to business. And what we will try to do is we will try to take a broad view of these valuations, which could be across actually market comparators. It could be looking at discounted cash flows, although that's actually quite difficult to use on kind of early stage businesses, and obviously that kind of scorecard balance that we're looking at. But the other thing that you've got to consider as well when we're talking about valuations is we see loads and loads of deals all of the time, so we get a really good feel for actually what a reasonable valuation is for a business at a certain stage. And actually you can come in and you can say, for example, I think my brand new business is going to be worth £10 million. Well, actually, we know from the majority of other opportunities that are presented to us in that way are coming in at more like £500,000. So it's always going to be harder to kind of really justify why we would invest in your opportunity at 10 million when, there's a whole bunch of similar opportunities, although maybe not directly similar, but opportunities where there's significantly less, and that really is a bit of a marriage. And again, that coming through that kind of relationship that we'd have with our potential companies that we would be looking to invest in. These are also discussion points and negotiation points that we go through from that initial conversation right through to when the term sheet happens, right through to when the legal documentation is finalized. So it does change. But thank you for the question.
Great, and David, I'd love to add to that. Sorry, Cole. Just when you look at house prices, and who determines the valuation? It's willing buyer, willing seller. It's the market determines the valuation, and I want that to come into the VC angel world, and I think it's getting there. But I think the main take-home message here is, if you have someone who wants to put money into a company, don't turn them away unless you don't want to sell your house, right? It's binary, and you can optimize it slightly, as David said. But go up to 10 investors, see what offers you get, triangulate those. That's the right answer. In terms of the metric I would focus on, if I had to give you one, it would probably be customer traction, because then not only is us thinking it's a good idea, it's someone parting with their hard-earned cash say, yes, I believe in this idea, and all of a sudden your value goes up. But the value will be what it will be. And so get your company as far as you can down the journey, approach investors, they'll give you an answer, take it or leave it. If you want to go on your own steam, you're welcome to, but that would be the price that we would be able to justify to compensate us for the risk that we'd be taking at this early stage.
I mean, ideally, if you're trying to drive a higher valuation, you need to get more offers from more VCs, and you just end up in a situation where it's just more competitive. And to the question, would the Berkus method be useful to value your starts? Well, actually, I'm always quite impressed when people come to me and they say my company's is valued at this based on. I've looked at all these different models, and this is what we've come up with. Well, actually, like Alex said, this is just a function of supply and demand. So what we want to do is as investors, we want to make sure that you're suitably rewarded for your involvement in the business, because actually there's no point in us just diluting you from 100% ownership to 10% ownership, because where's your motivation to grow the business? So we actually want you to remain motivated and a big part of it as well. I mean, at the end of the day, you're the skill and the knowledge and when I say you, I'm talking about the team. It's the skill and the knowledge and the experience that we're investing in. So the last thing as investors that we want to do is just, I guess, disincentivize you. So.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, because obviously the way we invest alongside other investors, and because we go down to kind of rounds at from a few £100,000 all the way up to, Series A rounds. But at the lower end, we'll often be going in alongside angels. And so companies will often come to us and say, look, these angels have valued our business at X, but we're not prepared to pay for it at that price because those angels are getting tax advantages via SEIS or EIS. So those valuations don't really stick. Same with friends and family that have put money in, don't really drive the valuation. The best way to come back to what Al and David said is around other VCs, other institutional investors driving the price. And as well as that, don't get hung up on the price. I would suggest it's better to have a good relationship with investors who can come back in again and again, because you may well need multiple rounds to get towards an exit point. So from a dev bank perspective, we'll come in and put in a few £100,000, but we'll go, as I said, all the way up to kind of £5-6 million at a time, so we can kind of help you on that journey from the very beginning to the end. You've got to consider, the investors are looking for a return. They've got to get the right stake in your business at the beginning to be able to drive the right return at the end of it when you come to sell it, but absolutely want to create the right alignment between the investors and the founders, so that the founders are going to get a decent return at the end too.
And I think, just kind of talking about that return, investing in early stage technology businesses is about as risky as you can get. So if you consider that a number of businesses will fail of a portfolio, actually the reason that valuations will be lower is to take into account the returns that need to be made in order to cover some losses as well. So.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Let's pick up that question from Lloyd. In terms of the MBOs, and feel free to jump in. I think that's a different division of DBW, the new investments team. So we specifically don't see it. We look for more of the grassroots startups. That being said, the best way to become an entrepreneur is to buy a business. So if you do have an opportunity, I do encourage that. And the test that all investors are going to be looking for in any MBO is, are the management team just trying to buy themselves a job because things are not going well? And if you pass that test, they're great deals because you have alignment. There will be some skin in the game from yourselves. So you've got to check with your significant other whether you can go on that journey, but you can create significant amounts of value and really employ the use of debt, which gives you the leverage, which increases your return. But there are risks, of course. But yeah, not. I mean, Dave, Cole, do you see many MBOs in Europe?
Got loads. I mean, they do happen. Dev banks do support them, but as you said, it's not particularly in our area.
I mean, it tends to be more for, I guess, organisations that have kind of reached their kind of growth curve.
Yeah, more private equity, more at
that stage. We're still buying blue sky at this point.
So it looks like we've come to the hour point. My prediction for half an hour was grossly wrong at the beginning. So we're coming towards an hour now, which is great. But just to say, I think it's just being recorded, so it'll be pushed out afterwards again, so you can go back through some of these points. We're all on LinkedIn, so you can find us on there or connect to us via Dev Bank. Always happy to look at deals and talk to entrepreneurs and founders and support them on their journey. So thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Al and Dave, and we'll leave it there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.